We continue our reading of Plato's First Alcibiades. Socrates says, "Mad, therefore, is the undertaking, my good sir, which you entertain thoughts of attempting, to teach others what you are ignorant of yourself, from your having neglected to learn it." Alcibiades: I believe, Socrates, that the Athenians, as well as other Grecian states, seldom deliberate in council about justice or injustice in any affair before them, because these things they presume obvious and plain to all men. Laying aside, therefore, the consideration of this point, they consider which way it will be most for their interest to take. For I suppose that justice and interest are not the same thing, seeing that many have found it their interest to have done things the most unjust, and that others have gained no advantage from having acted with honesty. Socrates: Well, suppose interest to be a thing ever so different from justice. Do you imagine now that you know what is a man's interest, and why this or that thing is so? Alcibiades: What should hinder me, Socrates, from knowing it? Unless you will make a doubt of this too, by asking me from whom I learned this knowledge, or how I discovered it myself. Socrates: How strangely you deal with me in this. If you say anything wrong, when 'tis possible to prove it wrong, by the same arguments used in confuting what you before said amiss, you would have new matter introduced, and different arguments made use of to prove you in the wrong again, as if the former proofs were worn out like old clothes, and you could no longer put them on, but one must bring you a fresh proof never used before. But without taking further notice of your evasions, I shall repeat the same question, and ask you, from what learning you came to know what was a man's interest, and who taught you this knowledge? And all the other questions asked before I ask you again, summing them up in one. It is evident now that your answers will amount to the very same as they did before, and that you will not be able to show by what means you attained the knowledge of what is advantageous to a man, or conducive to his good, either how you found it out yourself, or from whom you learned it. However, seeing that you are squeamish, and decline the tasting of the same arguments again, I waive the inquiry into this point, whether you have or not the knowledge of what is the interest of the Athenians. But this other point, whether the same actions are just and advantageous, or whether what 'tis just to do differs from what 'tis a man's interest to do. Why should not you prove, by putting questions to me, in the same manner as I did to you? Or if you had rather, make a discourse upon that subject wholly by yourself. Alcibiades: But I know not if I should be able, Socrates, to make such a discourse to you. Socrates: Why, my good friend, suppose me to be the assembly and the people, and, were you addressing your discourse to them, it would be proper for you to persuade every single man of them, would it not? Alcibiades: It would. Does it not belong, then, to the same person to be able to persuade one single man by himself, and to persuade many men assembled together, in speaking on any subject with which he is well acquainted, as for instance, a teacher of grammar is equally well able to persuade one man and many men, when letters are the subject of his discourse. True, says Alcibiades. Socrates. And when numbers are the subject, would not the same person who persuades many persuade one as well? He would, says Alcibiades. Socrates. And must not this person be one who is well acquainted with numbers? Must he not be an arithmetician? Alcibiades. Most certainly. Socrates. And would not you also, in speaking on any subjects, if you are able to persuade many of the truth of what you say, be able to persuade a single one? Alcibiades. 'Tis probable that I should. Socrates. But these subjects, it is plain, must be such as you are well acquainted with. Alcibiades. Undoubtedly. Socrates. Is there any other difference, then, between a speaker in the assembly of the people and a speaker in such conversation as this of ours, than merely so much as this? The former endeavors to persuade a collection of many men, the latter to persuade men one by one. Alcibiades. There appears to be no other. Socrates. Come then, since it apparently belongs to the same person to persuade a multitude and to persuade a single man, practice your skill on me, and undertake to prove to me that in some cases that which is just is not a man's interest. Alcibiades. You are very saucy, Socrates. Socrates. And I am now going to be so saucy as to convince you of the truth of a position quite contrary to that which you decline the proving of to me. Alcibiades. Begin then. Socrates. Do you but answer to the questions which I shall put to you. Alcibiades. Not so. But do you yourself say plainly what you have to say. Socrates. Why so? Would you not choose to be entirely well persuaded of the truth of it, if it be true? Alcibiades. By all means, certainly. Socrates. And would you not, if you yourself were to assert it, have the most entire persuasion of its truth? I think so, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Answer then to my questions. And if you do not hear from your own mouth that to act justly is to act for one's own advantage, believe no other person who asserts that position. Alcibiades. I shall not, and I consent to answer your questions, for no harm, I think, will come to me that way. Socrates. You think as if you had the spirit of divination. Tell me then, do you say that some just actions are advantageous to the man who performs them, and that some are not so? I do, says Alcibiades. And do you say also that some just actions are beautiful, and that some are not so? Alcibiades asks, what mean you by this question? Socrates. Whether did you ever think that a man acted basely and yet justly at the same time? Alcibiades. I never thought so. Socrates. You think then that all actions which are just are also beautiful? I do, says Alcibiades. But what as to actions which are beautiful? Whether do you think that all of these are good to the performer, or that some of them are so and some not so? Alcibiades. For my part, Socrates, I think that some beautiful actions are evil to the performer of them. Socrates. And that some base actions are good to the performer? I do, says Alcibiades. Do you mean such actions as these? Many men, by aiding in battle some friend or near relation, have been wounded mortally, whilst others, by withholding their aid when they ought to have given it, have come off safe and sound. Alcibiades. A just instance of what I mean. Socrates. That aid, then, of theirs you call beautiful with respect to their endeavoring to save those whom they ought to defend. Now, such an action proceeds from fortitude, does it not? It does, says Alcibiades. But evil you call it also with respect to the wounds and death which it procured them, do you not? I do, says Alcibiades. And are not fortitude and death two different things? Certainly, says Alcibiades. To aid a friend, therefore, is not both beautiful and evil in the same respect? Alcibiades says, it appears that is not. Socrates. Consider now whether it be not good in the same respect in which it is beautiful, as in this particular which we mentioned. For with respect to fortitude, you agreed with me that 'twas beautiful and handsome to give such aid. This very thing, then, fortitude, consider whether it be a good or an evil, and consider it in this way. Which kind of things would you choose to have your own, whether good things or evil things? Good things, says Alcibiades. And would you not choose the best things too? Most of all things, says Alcibiades. And would you not choose to part with them least of all? Undoubtedly, says Alcibiades. What say you then of fortitude? At what price would you choose to part with it? Alcibiades. I would not accept of life, not I, to live a coward. Socrates. You think then that cowardice is evil in the utmost degree? I do, says Alcibiades. Socrates. On a par, as it seems, with death? Alcibiades says, it is so. Socrates. Are not life and fortitude the most of all things opposite to death and cowardice? They are, says Alcibiades. And would you choose to have those most of all things, and these least of all things? Certainly, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Is it because you deem those the best of all things, and these the worst? For this very reason, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Viewing then the giving of aid in battle to such as are dear to us, in that light in which it appears beautiful, viewing it with regard to the practice of that virtue, which you acknowledge to be one of the best of things, you gave it the epithet of beautiful? Alcibiades. It appears I did so. Socrates. But with regard to its operating evil, the evil of death, you gave it the epithet of evil? True, says Alcibiades. Is it not then just and right to denominate every action thus? If with regard to the evil which it operates, you call it evil, ought it not with regard to the good which it operates to be also called good? Alcibiades says, I think it ought. Socrates, in the same respect, then, in which it is good, is it not beautiful? And in the same respect in which it is evil, is it not base? It is, says Alcibiades. In saying, then, that the aiding of our friends in battle is an action beautiful indeed, but that yet 'tis evil, you say exactly the same thing as if you called it an action, good indeed, but yet evil. Alcibiades, I think you're in the right, Socrates. Socrates, nothing, therefore, which is beautiful, so far as it is beautiful, is evil, nor is anything which is base, so far as it is base, good. Alcibiades, evidently it is not. Socrates, further now, consider it in this way. Whoever acts beautifully, does he not act well too? He does, says Alcibiades. And those who act well, are they not happy? Without doubt, says Alcibiades. And are they not happy by being possessed of good things? Most certainly, says Alcibiades. And are they not possessed of these good things by acting well and beautifully? They are, says Alcibiades. To act well, therefore, is in the rank of good things? Beyond a doubt, says Alcibiades. And is not acting well a beautiful thing also? It is, says Alcibiades. Again, therefore, we have found that one and the same thing is both beautiful and good. We have, says Alcibiades. Socrates, whatever then we should find to be a beautiful thing, we shall find it to be a good thing too, according to this reasoning. Alcibiades answers, it must be so. Socrates, and what? Are good things advantageous, or are they not? They are, answers Alcibiades. Do you remember now what we agreed in concerning things which are just? Alcibiades, I imagine that you mean this, that those persons who do things which are just must of necessity do things which at the same time are beautiful. Socrates, and did we not agree in this too, that those who do things which are beautiful do things which are also good? We did, says Alcibiades. And good things, you say, are advantageous? True, says Alcibiades. Things, therefore, which are just, O Alcibiades, are things which are advantageous. It seems they are, says Alcibiades. Well now, are not you the person who asserts these things? And am not I the questioner concerning them? Alcibiades responds, so it appears. Socrates, whoever then rises up to speak in any council, whether it be of Athenians or Peparethians, imagining that he discerns what is just and what is unjust, if he should say that he knows justice to be sometimes evil and detrimental, would you not laugh at his pretensions to knowledge? Since you yourself are found to be the very person who asserts that the same things are both just and advantageous? Alcibiades, now by the gods, Socrates, for my part, I know not what to say to it. but am quite like a man distracted. For sometimes I am of one opinion, just while you are putting your questions to me, and presently, after, am of another. Socrates. Are you ignorant now, my friend, what condition you are in? Entirely ignorant, answers Alcibiades. Socrates asks, do you imagine then that if any person were to ask you how many eyes you had, whether 2 or 3, or how many hands, whether 2 or 4, or any other such question, you would sometimes answer one thing and at other times another? Or would you always give the same answer? Alcibiades. I confess that I am now doubtful of myself, but I do believe that I should always give the same answer. Socrates. And is not your knowledge of the subject the cause of that consistency there would be in your answers? I believe it is, answers Alcibiades. When therefore you give contrary answers to one and the same question, without choosing to prevaricate, 'tis evident that you have no knowledge of the subject. Probably so, says Alcibiades. Now you say that to question concerning things just or unjust, beautiful or base, good or evil, advantageous or otherwise, you should answer sometimes one thing and sometimes another. Is it not then evident that your ignorance in these subjects is the cause of this inconsistency of yours? Alcibiades answers, it appears so to me myself. Socrates. Is not this then the true state of the case? On every subject which a man has not the knowledge of, must not his soul be wavering in her opinions? Most undoubtedly, answers Alcibiades. Socrates. Well now, do you know by what means you may mount up to heaven? Alcibiades. By Jupiter, not I. Socrates. Is your opinion doubtful and wavering on this subject? Not at all, says Alcibiades. Do you know the reason why it is not, or shall I tell it you? Alcibiades answers, do you tell me? Socrates. 'Tis this, my friend. It is because you neither know nor imagine that you know the way up to heaven. Alcibiades. How is that the reason? Explain yourself. Socrates. Let you and I consider it together. Concerning any affairs which you are ignorant of, and are at the same time convinced that you are so, do you waver in your opinions? For instance, in the affair of dressing meats and making sauces, you are, I presume, well acquainted with your ignorance. Perfectly well, says Alcibiades. Socrates. Do you form any opinions then yourself on these affairs of cookery, and waver in those opinions? Or do you leave those matters to such as are skilled in them? Alcibiades answers, I do as you mentioned last. Socrates. And what if you were in a ship under sail? Would you form any opinion whether the rudder ought to be turned toward the ship or from it, and be unsettled in that opinion for want of knowledge in the affair? Or would you leave it to the pilot, and not trouble yourself about it? Alcibiades answers, to the pilot I should leave it. Socrates. Concerning affairs, then, which you are ignorant of, and are no stranger to your own ignorance in those respects, you are not wavering in your opinions. Alcibiades. I believe I am not. Socrates. Do you perceive that errors committed in the doing of anything are all to be ascribed to this kind of ignorance in man, his imagining that he knows what he knows not? Alcibiades asks, how do you mean? Socrates. Whenever we undertake to act in any affair, it is only when we imagine we know what to do. Certainly, says Alcibiades. And such as have no opinion of their own knowledge in the affair, resign it up to others to act for them. Alcibiades asks, how should they do otherwise? Socrates. Ignorant persons of this kind live therefore without committing errors, because they give up the management of those affairs in which they are ignorant into the hands of others. True, says Alcibiades. What kind of persons, then, are those who err and act amiss? For certainly they are not such as know how to act. By no means, answers Alcibiades. Since then they are neither the knowing nor those of the ignorant who know that they are ignorant, are any other persons less left than of that kind who are ignorant, but imagine themselves knowing? Alcibiades answers, none other than these. Socrates. This kind of ignorance, therefore, is the cause of wrongdoings, and is the only kind which is culpable. Very true, says Alcibiades. Socrates. And where it concerns things of greatest moment, is it not in these cases the most of any mischievous and shameful? Alcibiades says, by far the most so. Socrates. Well then, can you name any things of greater moment than those which are honest and beautiful and good and advantageous? Certainly none, says Alcibiades. Is it not on these subjects that you acknowledge yourself to waver in your opinions? It is, says Alcibiades. And if you are thus wavering, is it not evident from our past conclusions, not only that you are ignorant in subjects of the greatest moment, but that amidst this ignorance you imagine that you know them? I fear it is so, says Alcibiades. Fie upon it, Alcibiades! What a condition, then, are you in? A condition which I am loath to name. But however, since we are alone, it must be spoken out. You are involved, my good sir, in that kind of ignorance which is the most shameful. According to the result of our joint reasoning, and according to your own concession. From this kind of ignorance it is that you are eager to engage in politics before you have learnt the elements of that science. Indeed, you are not the only person in this sad condition, for in the same state of ignorance are the numerous managers of our civil affairs, all of them, except perhaps Pericles, your guardian, and a few more. Alcibiades. And Socrates, to confirm this opinion of yours, Pericles is said to have become wise, not spontaneously or of himself. On the contrary, 'tis reported of him that he had had the advantage of enjoying the conversation of many wise men, particularly of Pythocles and Anaxagoras. And even at this time, old as he is intimate with Damon, for this very purpose. Here will end this third part of our reading of Plato's First Alcibiades.